Good morning. Let us be still for a moment before we begin, not in the sense of closing the eyes or quieting the body, but in the deeper sense of laying down the impulse to do something with what we hear. We are not gathered here to learn a new method, nor to acquire a new power, nor to discover a better way of making life work. If we come to this hour with that purpose, we shall leave much as we came, perhaps encouraged for a time, perhaps uplifted for a day or two, but unchanged at the root of our being. The work that takes place here does not begin with thought. It does not begin with intention. It does not even begin with understanding. It begins when we are willing, even for a moment, to release the belief that truth must be grasped by the mind, earned by effort, or attained by discipline. Be still and know that I am God. Not think about God, not reason about God, not affirm God, but know, and knowing is never an activity of the intellect. Most of us have been trained from childhood to believe that progress is the result of effort. We are taught to apply ourselves, to work harder, to concentrate more fully. And when we enter the spiritual path, we often carry this same habit with us. We strive to think better thoughts, to hold higher visions, to maintain a more spiritual attitude. And yet, after years of sincere effort, many find themselves weary, frustrated, and quietly disappointed, wondering why spiritual truth seems so close and yet so elusive. The reason is not that we lack sincerity. It is not that we lack discipline. It is that we are attempting to approach God with the very faculty that separates us from Him. The human mind, useful as it is in the world of form, is not the avenue of divine realization. My thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, saith the Lord. And until this is understood, spirituality becomes another burden rather than a release. So let us understand clearly at the outset. This hour is not designed to improve the mind. It is designed to take us beyond it. We are not here to gather information about manifestation, nor even to correct false ideas about it. We are here to prepare consciousness, to make ourselves receptive to that which can never be produced by thought, no matter how refined. When the Master said, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God," he was not advising us to seek a better condition, a healthier body, or a more abundant supply. He was pointing to a radical shift of awareness. The kingdom is not something we enter after mastering techniques. The kingdom is a state of consciousness that dawns when the personal sense of I relaxes its grip and yields to the presence already within. Many come to spiritual teaching with an unspoken agenda. They may not even be aware of it, yet it governs their listening. They are waiting to hear what they can do, what they can apply, what they can practice. And as long as this attitude persists, the mind remains active, alert, selective, judging. But truth does not enter through alertness. It enters through surrender. Except ye become as little children, ye shall not enter the kingdom of heaven. A child does not analyze. A child receives. Therefore, as we begin, let us lay down every expectation. Do not look ahead to what this teaching may bring you. Do not measure it by whether it promises improvement. For the Christ does not come to improve the human sense of life. It comes to supersede it. Behold, I make all things new, not repaired, not adjusted, new. If you find, even now, a sense of mental activity, questions forming, comparisons arising, agreements or disagreements stirring, do not resist them. Resistance gives power to what we wish to transcend. Simply recognize that this too is the movement of mind, and gently let it pass. We are not here to fight the mind, we are here to see through it. The real preparation for spiritual realization is not study, nor affirmation, nor visualization. It is inner consent. Consent to let God be God. Consent to stop using truth as a means to an end. Consent to rest in the acknowledgement, Father, I of myself can do nothing. This is not weakness. This is the doorway to power, not personal power, but the power that is, whether we use it or not. In a moment, or perhaps gradually, there may come a subtle shift, not dramatic, not emotional, but quiet, a sense of release, a feeling that nothing needs to be accomplished here. If that happens, cherish it. Do not analyze it. Do not attempt to hold it. Simply abide. In quietness and in confidence shall be your strength. And if nothing seems to happen outwardly, be content. The deepest work often takes place beyond sensation. Truth does not announce itself to the senses. It reveals itself in the fruits that follow peace where there was strain, trust where there was fear, rest where there was striving. So we begin not by doing, but by being willing not to do. We begin not by seeking to manifest, but by seeking to know God. And if we remain faithful to this one thing, all else will take care of itself, not by our planning, but by divine law. It must be understood and understood without condemnation that nearly everyone who turns to spiritual teaching does so because something in human experience is unsatisfactory. There may be illness, lack, loneliness, confusion, fear, or simply a sense of incompleteness that no amount of outward success has been able to silence. This is not wrong. It is, in fact, the very pressure that eventually loosens our attachment to material and mental solutions. Scripture reminds us, before I was afflicted, I went astray, but now have I kept thy word. The desire to improve life is not the problem. The problem arises only when we mistake improvement for realization and comfort for truth. The human sense of life is always seeking adjustment, better health, better relationships, better circumstances, and it assumes, quite naturally, that spirituality is another means to this end. And so it comes asking, often silently, how can God help me fix what is wrong? But spiritual awakening does not begin with the fixing of human conditions. It begins with the recognition that human conditions are not the foundation of life. The flesh profiteth nothing. It is the Spirit that quickeneth. Until this is seen, spirituality remains bound to the same cycle as material living, hope, effort, temporary relief, and renewed struggle. In the early stages of the path, we are permitted, indeed, even encouraged, to come with our needs. We are told to ask, to knock, to seek, and we do ask. We ask for healing, for supply, for protection, for guidance, and often, in mercy, these needs are met. But if we remain at this level, we never discover the deeper purpose of spiritual living. We remain, as Paul said, children tossed to and fro and carried about with every wind. Sooner or later, a moment arrives, sometimes quietly, sometimes painfully, when the student realizes that even spiritual demonstrations do not satisfy. A healing may occur, yet fear returns in another form. Supply may increase, yet insecurity remains. Relationships may improve, yet dependence persists. And at this point, a deeper question begins to stir. Is life meant to be a series of problems solved, Or is there something fundamentally different to be realized? This question marks a turning point. It is the beginning of discernment between seeking a better life and awakening to life itself. Jesus did not say, "I am come that they might have better conditions." He said, "I am come that they might have life and that they might have it more abundantly." Abundance is not an accumulation of effects. It is the recognition of source. Most spiritual seekers spend years attempting to improve the human self, refining it, purifying it, spiritualizing it, without realizing that the human self is not the object of redemption. That which is born of the flesh is flesh, and that which is born of the spirit is spirit. Flesh cannot be perfected into spirit. The human sense of life cannot be elevated into divine consciousness. It must be transcended. This does not mean that the human experience is ignored or despised. It means that it is no longer taken as the measure of truth. When we seek God primarily for what He can do for us, we unknowingly place ourselves at the center of the universe. But when we seek God for God's sake alone, something extraordinary occurs. The personal sense begins to fade, and with it the burden of managing life. The desire to improve experience is universal, because the belief in separation is universal. Humanity is not sinful in the moral sense. It is mistaken in the spiritual sense. It believes itself to be a self apart from God, struggling to survive in a world of forces. And from this belief arise fear, desire, ambition, and the endless effort to control outcomes. There is a way which seemeth right unto a man, but the end thereof are the ways of death. Spiritual teaching does not begin by correcting desire. It begins by revealing its source. Desire is the echo of a forgotten truth, the truth that fulfillment is not found in form, but in union. As long as we seek fulfillment through conditions, even spiritual ones, we remain bound to the wheel of cause and effect. But when we turn within and seek the kingdom, desire itself is transformed. At this stage, we are not asked to renounce our hopes or deny our needs. We are asked only to question our assumptions. Is harmony something to be produced or something to be revealed? Is peace something to be achieved or something that emerges when resistance ceases? The kingdom of God cometh not with observation, for behold, the kingdom of God is within you. And so the desire to improve human experience, sincere and universal as it is, must eventually yield to a deeper longing, the longing to know God, not as helper, but as being. When this longing awakens, the path shifts. The seeker becomes a listener. The struggler becomes a beholder. And life, once something to be managed, becomes something to be witnessed. When the limitations of material living begin to press upon us, when medicine, economics, relationships, and personal effort no longer promise security, the human consciousness does not immediately turn to God. It turns instead to a subtler form of control. Having discovered that matter does not govern life, it assumes quite logically that mind must, and so mind power enters as a spiritual substitute, clothed in the language of truth, but rooted in the same belief in personal causation. This movement toward mental methods is not accidental. It represents progress, yet incomplete progress. Humanity has taken a step away from matter, but not yet beyond self. The power once attributed to external conditions is now attributed to thought. The world that was once controlled by circumstance is now believed to be controlled by consciousness, but consciousness is misunderstood to mean personal thinking. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, not through malice, but through misinterpretation. Mind power promises mastery. It assures the seeker that by right thinking, disciplined visualization, or sustained affirmation, life can be shaped according to desire. And for a time, this appears to work. Conditions shift, bodies respond, circumstances rearrange themselves, and the student concludes that he has found the law of life. But what he has found is not spiritual law, it is mental law, and mental law is still within the realm of duality. The danger of mind power is not that it is false, but that it is partial. It gives enough results to delay the deeper awakening. It strengthens the sense of a personal I who thinks, directs, and controls, and this very sense is the barrier to realization. Ye shall be as gods, the serpent whispered, not realizing that the true God cannot be imitated by thought. Mind power subtly shifts the center of authority from God to the individual. The student no longer says, Father, thy will be done, but I must hold the right consciousness. I must maintain the right vibration. I must not let negative thoughts enter. The burden of creation is placed squarely upon the human mind, and spirituality becomes a full-time occupation guarding thought, correcting error, monitoring inner states. And here, many sincere seekers become exhausted. They have left material struggle only to enter mental struggle. They are no longer fighting circumstances, they are fighting themselves. The moment fear arises, they rush to replace it. The moment doubt appears, they attempt to affirm it away. But the very act of fighting gives reality to what they resist. That which I greatly feared is come upon me. It must be seen that mind power, however refined, operates within the same framework as material effort. It assumes that something is wrong and must be fixed. It assumes that lack, disease, or discord has reality and must be overcome. And in doing so, it grants these appearances a power they do not possess in truth. The battlefield has shifted from the outer world to the inner, but the war continues. Joel never denied the effects of thought. He acknowledged clearly and honestly that the human mind can influence form. But he also saw what most do not, that anything produced by mental force must be maintained by mental force. And what happens when attention wavers, when fatigue sets in, when fear returns? The demonstration fades, and the student concludes that he has failed spiritually when in truth he has simply reached the limits of mind. This is why so many teachings promise permanent results and deliver temporary relief. They operate on the level of cause and effect, not on the level of being. They rearrange appearances, but do not dissolve the belief in separation that produces appearances. The house built upon the sand fell, and great was the fall of it. Mind power keeps the seeker busy. It gives him something to do, something to manage, something to perfect. But God is not found in busyness. Be still and know. Stillness is not a technique. It is the absence of manipulation. It is the moment when the mind ceases trying to be God and allows God to be. The rise of mind power is therefore a necessary phase, but not a final one. It is the bridge between material dependence and spiritual surrender. And like all bridges, it must eventually be crossed, not inhabited. When the student begins to feel that something is missing, even amid demonstrations, he is being gently called beyond mind into consciousness itself. This is not a call to abandon intelligence, nor to despise thought, It is a call to recognize its rightful place. Thought is a tool, not a creator. Mind is an instrument, not a source. I can of mine own self do nothing. Until this truth is accepted, not intellectually, but experientially, the spiritual journey remains incomplete. It is important, if we are to be honest students of truth, that we do not dismiss mind power as illusion in the sense of nothingness. That would be neither accurate nor helpful. The human mind does have influence. Thought does register effects. Jesus himself acknowledged this when he said, "According to your faith be it unto you." And yet, even here, he was not glorifying thought. He was pointing beyond it. Mind power appears to work because thought operates within a law, an impersonal law of cause and effect on the mental plane. When thought is concentrated, confident, and unopposed by doubt, it can and does alter appearances. Bodies respond. Circumstances rearrange. Events shift. This is why so many are convinced that they have found the ultimate key to life. They have touched the law, but not the law. The difficulty lies not in what mind power can do, but in what it cannot sustain. The effects produced by mental force are dependent upon continued attention. They require vigilance, repetition, and maintenance. The moment attention weakens, fear intrudes, or confidence falters, the structure collapses. And this is not failure, it is the natural limitation of mental causation. Scripture gives us a clear warning here. Having begun in the Spirit, are ye now made perfect by the flesh? Mind, power, however refined, remains within the realm of personal effort. It assumes that there is a thinker apart from God, a will apart from divine will, an intelligence capable of directing life. And as long as this assumption remains unchallenged, results must be unstable. Many students notice this pattern in their own experience. They achieve a healing only to fear its loss. They experience supply only to worry about continuity. They find harmony only to guard it anxiously. And what they are guarding is not harmony, it is a mental construction. True harmony does not require protection. It rests in law, not effort. The Lord shall preserve thy going out and thy coming in. Mind power keeps the student alert, tense, watchful. It trains consciousness to scan for error, to monitor thought, to detect negativity. And in doing so, it reinforces the very belief it seeks to overcome, that evil has power and must be managed. This is why mental practice often produces exhaustion rather than peace. The mind was never designed to carry the weight of creation. Joel saw clearly that anything achieved by mental manipulation must eventually be undone by mental manipulation, either by oneself or by another. One stronger belief replaces a weaker one. One dominant thought overcomes a lesser one. But nothing has been resolved at the root. The same mechanism that healed today may harm tomorrow. For whatsoever is born of the flesh is flesh. This explains why mental demonstrations are often dramatic but short-lived. They impress the senses but do not transform consciousness. They adjust the surface while leaving the foundation untouched. And sooner or later, life presses again, not as punishment, but as invitation. An invitation to move beyond the level of force into the realm of grace. Grace does not operate by effort. It does not depend on mental strength or emotional certainty. Grace is not produced, it is revealed. By grace are ye saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God. A gift cannot be earned maintained, or protected. It can only be received. The temporary nature of mind power is not a failure of the student. It is a mercy. It prevents us from mistaking a tool for the source. It gently exposes the insufficiency of personal control. And when the student grows weary of managing life through thought, a new possibility begins to dawn, the possibility of resting in being. At this point, something profound occurs. The question shifts. It is no longer, how can I think better? It becomes, who is thinking? And this question, sincerely entertained, begins to dissolve the false sense of self that has been struggling to govern life. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. Mind power appears to work because it touches law. It fails to endure because it does not touch reality. Reality is not manipulated. Reality is not directed. Reality is known only when the personal sense yields to the presence that has always been. And this knowing does not come through effort, but through surrender. At the root of all misunderstanding in spiritual practice lies one fundamental error, subtle in appearance, yet far-reaching in its effects: the belief that thought is cause. This belief may take many forms: positive thinking, right thinking, scientific prayer, visualization, but beneath them all is the same assumption that reality is shaped by what the human mind does. This assumption is never questioned by the intellect, because the intellect itself depends upon it. Thought believes in thought, and so the mind, sincere and industrious, sets about improving its own activity, refining its processes, disciplining its patterns, hoping that by becoming more spiritual in its thinking, it will eventually arrive at truth. But truth is not the result of better thinking. The wisdom of this world is foolishness with God. Thought is an activity within consciousness. It is not the source of consciousness. Thought arises, changes, contradicts itself, and passes away. Consciousness remains. Yet when thought is mistaken for cause, consciousness is obscured, and the personal sense of I assumes a role it was never meant to occupy. The human mind begins to act as creator, judge, healer, provider, and in doing so, it unknowingly separates itself from the very source it seeks. This is why spiritual effort so often leads to tension rather than peace. The mind is attempting to perform a divine function. It is trying to be omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent, qualities that belong to God alone. I am the Lord. That is my name, and my glory will I not give to another. When the mind takes upon itself the work of God, it must inevitably fail, not because God withholds power, but because power cannot be delegated to the personal sense. Thought can rearrange appearances, but it cannot touch being. It can influence form, but it cannot create life. It can modify experience, but it cannot reveal truth. And yet, as long as we believe thought to be cause, we remain engaged in an endless process of correction, correcting thoughts, correcting feelings, correcting reactions, never arriving at rest. Joel was uncompromising here because the stakes are high. As long as thought is believed to be cause, the student remains bound to duality. Good thoughts must battle bad thoughts. Right thinking must overcome wrong thinking. Light must fight darkness. But the Christ does not fight. It reveals. The light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not. Darkness is not overcome. It disappears when light is present. Consciousness is cause, but not consciousness as we usually mean it, not personal awareness, not directed attention, not mental focus. Consciousness, as Joel speaks of it, is the awareness of God's presence, the recognition that God is the only life, the only mind, the only power. This consciousness is not achieved by effort. It is uncovered by surrender. It does not act upon conditions. It dissolves the belief that conditions have power. When thought is mistaken for cause, the student becomes preoccupied with mental states. He watches himself constantly. He measures his progress by how well he controls his thinking. And when discord appears, he assumes he has failed spiritually. But this is not spiritual living. It is self-monitoring. And self-monitoring strengthens the very self that must be transcended. Scripture speaks plainly here, not by might nor by power, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord of hosts. Might and power include mental might as surely as physical force. Anything that proceeds from personal effort belongs to the same order. Spirit alone is causative, and spirit is not directed by thought. Spirit reveals itself when thought becomes still. This is the great release that comes when the fundamental error is seen. The student no longer feels responsible for creating harmony. He no longer believes it is his task to heal, supply, or protect. His responsibility is not to think rightly, but to acknowledge rightly. An acknowledgement is not an act of mind, it is a yielding of mind. When we cease trying to use consciousness and instead consent to be used by it, a shift takes place. The strain of effort falls away. The anxiety of maintenance dissolves. We are no longer trying to make something happen. We are learning to witness what is happening. The Father that dwelleth in me, he doeth the works. This does not mean that thought disappears from daily life. It means that thought is restored to its proper place as servant, not master, as tool, not creator. Thought becomes quiet, functional, unobtrusive. It no longer carries the burden of salvation. And in this release, the door to true realization begins to open. The fundamental error is not corrected by replacing one thought with another. It is corrected by seeing through thought altogether. And this seeing does not come by analysis, but by grace. When the mind is willing to admit, even for a moment, I do not know, it has taken its first step out of the way. At a certain point on the spiritual path, often after years of sincere effort, there comes a weariness that cannot be explained away. The student has studied faithfully. He has practiced diligently. He has applied every method he knows. And yet, beneath the surface, there is fatigue. Not physical fatigue alone, but a deeper exhaustion of the soul. This exhaustion is not a failure. It is a sign. It is the signal that the limits of mental effort have been reached. Many at this stage believe they are doing something wrong. They assume they have not been disciplined enough, not vigilant enough, not faithful enough, and so they redouble their efforts. They watch their thoughts more carefully. They become stricter with themselves. They fear a lapse, knowing that one careless moment may undo weeks of work. But this only deepens the strain, because the mind was never intended to carry the burden of spiritual realization. The mental practitioner lives in a constant state of alertness. He is always correcting, always adjusting, always guarding. He listens not with openness, but with evaluation. Is this true? Does this work? Can I apply this? Even in prayer, the mind remains active, directing, affirming, declaring. And though this activity may bring temporary relief, it never brings rest. Come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Rest, not better technique. This exhaustion often appears disguised as discouragement or boredom or even cynicism. The student may say, I know all this already, or nothing seems to work anymore. But beneath these words is a deeper realization struggling to surface. The realization that life cannot be lived successfully from the level of mind. No matter how spiritual the language, mind is still mind. Joel recognized this stage as sacred. It is the moment when the soul has exhausted its reliance on personal effort. It is the moment when the student is ripe for surrender, not resignation, but surrender. When I am weak, then am I strong. Weakness here does not mean incapacity. It means the relinquishment of false responsibility. The exhaustion of the mental practitioner is a mercy. It prevents us from perfecting a false path. It stops us from becoming experts in self-management. It gently but firmly reveals that truth is not achieved, it is received. And what is received must come from a source beyond the receiver. At this point, many are tempted to abandon the spiritual path altogether. They conclude that spirituality promises much and delivers little. But what they are really abandoning is not spirituality, it is mental spirituality. They have reached the edge of mind, and instead of stepping beyond, they turn back. Yet for those who remain, even quietly, even without knowing why, a new dimension begins to open. This new dimension is not dramatic. It does not announce itself with visions or revelations. It appears as a simple longing for quiet, a desire to stop striving, a willingness to sit without agenda. The student no longer asks, what must I do? He asks, often unconsciously, is it possible to live without this effort? And in this question lies the seed of grace. The exhaustion of the mental practitioner prepares the way for a radical discovery that God has never asked us to manage life, that the responsibility we have carried was never ours, that the burden of maintaining harmony belongs to divine law, not to human vigilance. Cast thy burden upon the Lord, and he shall sustain thee. When this is glimpsed, even faintly, the soul breathes. The grip of effort loosens. The student begins to suspect that peace is not something to be achieved, but something that emerges when resistance ends. This is not passivity. It is trust. It is not neglect. It is obedience to a higher order. And so we do not criticize the mental practitioner. We honor him. He has walked the path as far as it can be walked by will. He has proven through experience what cannot be sustained. And now, standing at the threshold of a deeper way, he is invited not to do more, but to let go. At this point on the path, a decisive turning must take place, not dramatic, not emotional, but unmistakable in its inward direction. It is here that Joel's teaching separates itself from nearly every modern approach to spirituality, for he does not offer a better way to create reality. He reveals that reality is not created by us at all. The human sense of life has always assumed authorship. Whether through physical labor or mental discipline, it believes itself to be the doer, the planner, the cause. And when this belief enters spiritual teaching, it merely adopts a subtler vocabulary. The practitioner no longer says, I will work for this, but I will manifest this. The sense of I remains intact, only now it wears sacred clothing. Joel cuts through this illusion with a single radical shift. We are not here to make things happen. We are here to witness what God is doing. This is not a poetic metaphor. It is a complete reversal of spiritual orientation. My Father worketh hitherto, and I work. Not I as originator, but I as transparency. Witnessing is not passivity. It is the highest form of activity because it allows divine action to appear without obstruction. When we attempt to create reality, we impose form upon life. When we witness reality, we allow life to reveal its own form. Eye hath not seen, nor ear heard, neither have entered into the heart of man the things which God hath prepared. The difference between creating and witnessing is the difference between strain and peace. Creating requires effort, maintenance, vigilance. Witnessing requires only receptivity. Creating keeps attention fixed on outcomes. Witnessing rests attention in source. Creating asks, "What must I do?" Witnessing asks nothing but listens. "Speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth." This pivot cannot be made by decision alone. The mind cannot choose to witness. Witnessing occurs when the mind relinquishes its claim to authorship. It happens when the student is willing even briefly to admit that he does not know what should happen next. This admission is not ignorance. It is humility, and humility is the doorway to revelation. Joel often emphasized that spiritual progress is not measured by what we demonstrate, but by what we are willing to release. The release of personal will is the most difficult surrender of all. We may give up habits, possessions, even opinions, yet still cling fiercely to the belief that we are responsible for directing life. And as long as this belief remains, witnessing is impossible. To witness God in action means to trust that divine intelligence precedes every situation. It means to approach life without rehearsal. It means to let go of the need to know outcomes in advance. Take therefore no thought for the morrow. This is not carelessness. It is alignment with a higher order of law. When the student begins to live as a witness, something extraordinary occurs. Fear diminishes, not because circumstances improve immediately, but because responsibility shifts. Life is no longer something to be managed. It is something unfolding, and the unfolding carries with it an intelligence that the mind could never supply. Witnessing does not mean ignoring appearances. It means refusing to grant them causative power. The witness does not deny disease, lack, or discord, but he does not attempt to fix them either. He acknowledges a higher activity at work, an activity unseen but irresistible. The wind bloweth where it listeth, and thou hearest the sound thereof, but canst not tell whence it cometh and whither it goeth. This is why Joel could say with quiet certainty that the greatest service we can render the world is not our effort, but our illumination. A consciousness at rest in God blesses without intention. It heals without direction. It supplies without planning, not because it is powerful, but because it is transparent. The pivot from creating to witnessing marks the end of spiritual ambition. There is no longer a desire to become something, achieve something, or prove something. There is only a willingness to stand still and see. And in that stillness, the Christ reveals itself not as an idea, not as a method, but as life itself. This pivot cannot be rushed. It unfolds as the fruit of experience, often born of exhaustion, disappointment, and sincere longing, but when it comes, even partially, it changes everything. The struggle ends, the path simplifies, and the student begins at last to live from spirit rather than toward it. Now we come to a point that must be approached with great tenderness, for it is here that the mind is most easily tempted to grasp, define, and misuse what is being revealed. When we say that consciousness is cause, we are not speaking of consciousness as attention, focus, awareness, or any refined form of thinking. We are not speaking of something that can be directed, trained, or employed. We are speaking of that which is before thought arises. Consciousness, as Joel uses the term, is not something you have. It is what you are when the sense of a personal I is not in the way. It is the awareness of God's presence, and that awareness is not achieved through effort. It is uncovered when effort ceases. Not that we loved God, but that he loved us. Always first, always prior. Directed thought assumes separation. It assumes a thinker here and a reality there, waiting to be shaped. Consciousness, however, knows no distance. There is no here directing something out there. There is only the presence of God, revealing itself as form, activity, intelligence, and harmony. In him we live and move and have our being, not in our thoughts about him, but in him. This is why every attempt to use consciousness as a power inevitably collapses back into mind. The moment we say, I will hold a higher consciousness, we have already reduced consciousness to a mental state. Consciousness cannot be held. It holds us. It cannot be produced. It produces all that appears, and it cannot be directed, for it is already functioning perfectly as divine law. The human mind longs to participate. It wants a role. It asks, what must I do to stay in this consciousness? But consciousness is not maintained by vigilance. It is not preserved by discipline. It is not stabilized by repetition. The Lord shall fight for you, and ye shall hold your peace. Peace here does not mean calm emotion. It means non-interference. When consciousness is recognized as cause, the entire structure of spiritual effort collapses. There is no longer a need to protect demonstrations, because demonstrations are no longer the point. There is no longer fear of wrong thought, because thought is no longer believed to be causative. There is no longer a struggle to be spiritual, because spirituality is no longer an achievement. It is revealed as identity. Joel often emphasized that spiritual power does not operate through intensity, but through impersonality. The less personal we are, the more present God becomes. Not because God draws nearer, but because the obstruction has thinned. He must increase, but I must decrease. This decrease is not humiliation, it is liberation. To live from consciousness as cause means that we no longer approach life as a series of problems requiring solutions. We approach life as a revelation in progress. We do not ask, how shall this be healed? We ask nothing, and in asking nothing, we receive, your Father knoweth what things ye have need of, before ye ask him. This does not mean that thought disappears from daily living. It means that thought is no longer creative in the false sense. Thought becomes functional, used for writing, planning, speaking, but never for producing harmony. Harmony flows from a deeper source. Thought merely follows, arranging itself around what has already been established in consciousness. At first, this way of living feels unfamiliar. The mind protests. It fears irresponsibility. It warns of neglect. But gradually, through quiet moments of trust, the student begins to see that life is actually governed more harmoniously when left alone. The government shall be upon his shoulder, and when the government is truly there, it need not be on ours. Consciousness's cause reveals a profound equality among all appearances, a headache and a disease, lack and abundance, conflict and peace. None of these are causes. They are effects, shadows cast by belief. And when belief yields to awareness, the shadows fade without effort. Arise, shine, for thy light is come. This is not a teaching to be practiced. It is a truth to be lived into. There will be moments of forgetting, moments of reasserting personal will. That is natural. But each return to stillness, each quiet acknowledgement of God's presence deepens the realization that life is not waiting for our direction. Consciousness is cause, and consciousness is God awareness. And God awareness does not act, it is. When this is glimpsed, even briefly, the need to manifest dissolves because fulfillment has already been found. And from that fulfillment, life unfolds in ways the mind could never have imagined. Now we come to a statement so familiar that it has lost its power through repetition, and yet so profound that, when rightly understood, it dissolves nearly every spiritual struggle we have ever known. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added unto you. Most students hear this as a command. It is not. It is a description of law. Jesus was not telling us to prioritize spiritual study over material activity. He was revealing the order of reality. He was saying, in effect, that cause precedes effect, and that when cause is consciously acknowledged, effect appears without effort. The tragedy is that the human mind immediately turns this into a technique. If I seek God long enough, faithfully enough, purely enough, then God will give me what I want. That interpretation puts us right back into bargaining, and God does not bargain. To seek the kingdom is not to search for something missing. The kingdom is not absent. The kingdom of God is within you. Therefore, seeking cannot mean looking outward, upward, or forward. It can only mean turning inward and ceasing the outward search. Seeking, in this sense, is not effort. It is surrender. When Jesus says, seek ye first, he is not speaking of time sequence, but of principle. First in importance, not first in chronology. He is saying, acknowledge God as the source before acknowledging appearances as real. Acknowledge spirit as substance before acknowledging matter as condition. Acknowledge divine law before reacting to human evidence. Most students reverse this order. They look at the problem first, feel the pressure first, experience fear first, and then afterward turn to God for relief. That is not seeking first. That is seeking last. And when God is sought last, God is reduced to a remedy instead of recognized as reality. To seek first the kingdom is to begin every experience from the standpoint of God, is before asking, before judging, before fearing, before planning. It is to stand, even if only for a moment, in the awareness that before Abraham was, I am. Before this condition, before this need, before this crisis, God is, and what is the kingdom? It is not a place. It is not a future state. It is the reign of God consciousness. It is the awareness in which God is recognized as the only life, the only mind, the only law, the only substance. Wherever that recognition is present, even faintly, the kingdom is present. And wherever the kingdom is present, harmony is inevitable, not because we make it so, but because there is nothing else there to oppose it. This is why Jesus adds, and his righteousness. Righteousness is not morality. It is right seeing. It is the right relationship between God and man. It is the understanding that man does not live by bread alone, not by conditions, not by income, not by health statistics, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. That word is not language. It is being. When righteousness is understood in this way, there is no longer a personal doer trying to live spiritually. There is only a yielding to what is already spiritually established. And in that yielding, the human sense of responsibility softens. We discover that we were never meant to carry the weight of life on our own shoulders. Cast thy burden upon the Lord, and he shall sustain thee. Notice that Jesus does not say, all these things might be added. He says, shall be added. Not as reward, not as payment, not as miracle, but as consequence. Just as light appears when darkness is absent, just as warmth is felt when the sun is unobstructed, so supply, health, and right activity appear when the kingdom is consciously acknowledged. But here is the subtlety. The moment we seek the kingdom for the sake of the added things, we are no longer seeking the kingdom. We are seeking effects. And effects cannot produce cause. That is why many sincere students feel they are doing everything right and yet feel stalled. Their seeking is still conditional. Their surrender still has a hidden agenda. True seeking is desireless. It does not ask God to improve life. It yields life to God. It does not ask for protection. It rests in divine governance. It does not seek to change circumstances. It lets circumstances be reinterpreted by truth. Be still and know that I am God. Not be busy, not be clever, not be correct. Be still. When the kingdom is sought in this way, the sense of time dissolves. We stop asking, how long will this take? Because we are no longer waiting for something to happen. Something has already happened. Awareness has shifted. And when awareness shifts, experience must follow, just as surely as shadow follows form. In this light, seeking becomes a way of life, not an activity. It becomes a quiet turning throughout the day, a silent remembrance, a gentle refusal to grant reality to appearances without first acknowledging God. It is not dramatic. It is often unnoticed, but it is powerful beyond measure. And so we begin to understand that seeking first the kingdom is not something we do once and then graduate from. It is the continuous orientation of consciousness away from appearances and toward reality. And in that orientation, life gradually reveals itself not as a problem to be solved, but as God made manifest. There comes a moment in the life of every sincere student when something very unexpected happens. After years of striving to demonstrate, to heal, to manifest, to improve conditions, there arrives a quiet pause, and in that pause, the desire to manifest falls away. This is often mistaken for discouragement, or spiritual fatigue, or loss of faith. In truth, it is one of the most reliable signs that God has begun to be found As long as we are seeking demonstrations, we are still assuming absence. We are assuming that something essential is missing and must be supplied. But when God is found, not intellectually, not emotionally, but consciously, the sense of lack dissolves. And when lack dissolves, the hunger to manifest disappears with it. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. Want ends, not because it has been fulfilled, but because it has been seen through. Manifestation belongs to the level of mind. Even refined metaphysical practice operates within the assumption that thought can produce form, and while this may yield temporary results, it does not touch the root. It does not end fear. It merely rearranges appearances. That is why Joel so often said that demonstrations are not proof of spiritual attainment. They are, at best, byproducts. When God is found, life is no longer approached as a series of needs. It is approached as an unfolding. The question is no longer, how can I make this happen? But what is God revealing here? That shift alone removes the personal will from the equation. And where personal will is absent, divine order becomes evident. This is why Jesus never taught manifestation. He never instructed his disciples to visualize, affirm, or mentally produce outcomes. He taught abiding. Abide in me, and I in you. Abiding is not effort. It is rest. It is remaining where you already are in God consciousness. And from that abiding fruit appears naturally, as the branch cannot bear fruit of itself except it abide in the vine. Notice that the branch does not strain to produce grapes. It does not plan the harvest. It does not worry about timing. It simply abides. And in that abiding, fruitage is inevitable. When manifestation is pursued, the branch is trying to be the vine. When God is found, the branch remembers its source and relaxes into its function. At this stage, many students feel disoriented. They ask, if I am not to manifest, what is my role? The answer is unsettling to the mind. You have no role. Or rather, your role is no longer personal. Your function is to be a transparency through which God's activity can appear. I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. That is not poetry. It is instruction. When manifestation stops being the goal, life becomes strangely lighter. Needs are still met, often more gracefully than before, but they no longer dominate consciousness. Health improves, relationships harmonize, supply flows, but these are no longer events to celebrate or cling to. They are recognized as natural expressions of alignment, not achievements. This is also where gratitude deepens. No longer is gratitude directed toward outcomes. It is directed toward presence. We are grateful not because something happened, but because God is. And that gratitude is not emotional excitement. It is quiet acknowledgement. It is the silent yes to reality as it is before it changes. Joel often warned that attachment to demonstrations can become a subtle form of idolatry. We begin to worship results rather than reality. We measure our spiritual life by appearances rather than awareness. But God is not found in appearances. God is found in stillness. And when God is found there, appearances must follow suit. It is here that the student begins to understand the deeper meaning of success. Success is no longer defined by outer improvement, but by inner stability, by the ability to remain undisturbed, by the capacity to trust without evidence, By the willingness to let life unfold without interference. Commit thy way unto the Lord. Trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass. Bring what to pass? That which already belongs to divine order. And so manifestation stops, not because life becomes barren, but because life becomes full. The cup runneth over, not because it was filled, but because it was never empty. The student stops asking for more and begins to see what has always been present. This is not the end of the journey. It is the end of striving. And in that ending, a new way of living quietly begins, one that does not seek to change the world, but to see it rightly. And in seeing rightly, the world cannot help but change. One of the last illusions to fall away on the spiritual path is the belief that effort is holy. From childhood, we are taught that nothing of value comes without struggle, that discipline produces reward, and that effort proves sincerity. And so, when we turn toward God, we carry this same belief with us. We assume that spiritual living must require greater effort than worldly living. But here the Master gently overturns everything we have learned. My yoke is easy, and my burden is light. If this is true, and it is, then any sense of strain, pressure, or spiritual fatigue must come from misunderstanding, not from God. Divine life does not exhaust, it sustains. Divine truth does not burden, it liberates. And wherever effort appears in our spiritual experience, it is a sign that the personal self has quietly re-entered the scene. Effort belongs to mind. It is the mind trying to become something it is not, or to get somewhere it is not. But spirit is not becoming. Spirit is being, and being requires no effort. The sun does not try to shine, it shines. The flower does not strain to bloom, it blooms. And man, when understood as the expression of God, does not strive to live spiritually, he lives spiritually by nature. The illusion of effort arises from the belief that we are separate from the source we seek. If God were distant, effort would be necessary. If truth were absent, effort would be required to bring it near. But since God is omnipresent, effort can only interfere. Where shall I go from thy spirit? Or whither shall I flee from thy presence? There is nowhere to go, and therefore nothing to achieve. This does not mean that the early stages of the path feel effortless. On the contrary, there is often great struggle at first, not because truth is difficult, but because resistance is strong. The mind resists surrender. The ego resists disappearance. The human sense of self resists being dethroned, and this resistance is experienced as effort. But that effort is not spiritual. It is psychological. As the student matures, something remarkable happens. Practices fall away, routines soften, techniques lose their appeal, and in their place, a simple attentiveness emerges. Not vigilance, not discipline, but attentiveness, a quiet listening, a readiness to let God be God. Speak, Lord, for thy servant heareth. Not speak, Lord, and I will act, but speak, and I will listen. True spiritual living is marked by increasing ease, not ease of circumstances necessarily, but ease of being. We stop bracing against life. We stop anticipating problems. We stop preparing defenses. And in that unguarded state, divine order becomes visible. Things begin to fall into place not because we have aligned them, but because we have stopped obstructing them. Joel often said that the highest form of prayer is listening, And listening, by its nature, requires no effort. You cannot listen harder. You either listen or you do not. The moment you try to listen, you are thinking again. Listening happens when thought subsides, and thought subsides not through force, but through rest. This is why meditation in the infinite way is not concentration. It is not focus. It is not mental stillness achieved through control. It is the gentle withdrawal of attention from appearances and the quiet acknowledgement of God's presence. And when that acknowledgement is sincere, effort dissolves. The soul rests in what it already knows. The illusion of effort also expresses itself as self-improvement. We try to become more loving, more patient, more spiritual. But love is not manufactured. Patience is not cultivated. Spirituality is not acquired. These qualities are the natural outflow of God consciousness. When God is recognized as the source, qualities appear without strain. That which is born of the Spirit is spirit. When effort falls away, responsibility shifts. We no longer feel personally responsible for outcomes. We feel responsible only for recognition of truth, recognition of presence, recognition of divine government. And even that responsibility is light, because recognition is not something we do. It is something that happens when we are receptive. This is why spiritual living becomes simpler as it deepens. Not more complex, not more demanding, simpler, quieter, more natural. We begin to trust the rhythm of life. We stop rushing God. We stop questioning timing. We stop measuring progress. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. God does not force entry. God waits for effort to cease. And when effort ceases, the door opens, not because we opened it, but because it was never locked. What we thought was discipline was actually fear. What we thought was dedication was often control. And what we thought was effort was simply the mind trying to manage what only God can govern. In this light, spiritual living is revealed not as a path of exertion, but as a path of yielding. Yielding to what is already true, yielding to what is already present, yielding to what has always been functioning long before we knew its name. There is a subtle habit of the human mind that often goes unnoticed, even by advanced students. The habit of living ahead of the moment. We anticipate outcomes, prepare for possibilities, rehearse futures, and guard against imagined dangers. And yet Scripture reminds us, take therefore no thought for the morrow shall take thought for the things of itself. This is not advice. It is revelation. Anticipation is fear disguised as prudence. Even when it appears hopeful, it carries within it the assumption that good is not yet secure. Fear and anticipation are born of the same belief that life is unfolding without God's immediate presence. But when consciousness rests in God, the future loses its authority. The now becomes sufficient. To live without anticipation does not mean passivity. It means presence. It means allowing each moment to reveal its own instruction. As thy days, so shall thy strength be. Not tomorrow's strength for tomorrow's burden, but today's strength for today's moment. And when we remain there, fear has no foothold. Fear cannot exist where God is consciously acknowledged. It may appear as sensation or memory, but it cannot govern. For fear depends on separation, and separation dissolves in presence. Perfect love casteth out fear, Love here is not emotion. It is awareness of unity. As anticipation fades, something unexpected occurs. Guidance becomes natural. We are no longer searching for signs. We are no longer asking, "What should I do?" Action arises spontaneously, appropriately, without strain. The right word is spoken. The right step is taken. And afterward, we marvel not at our wisdom, but at the ease with which life unfolded. This is living by grace, not by foresight. Divine order is not something imposed upon chaos. It is the underlying reality that has always been present, temporarily obscured by belief. When trust deepens, we stop trying to arrange life into harmony and begin to notice that harmony is already functioning beneath appearances. He hath made everything beautiful in his time, not in our time, not according to our plans, but in his time. Trusting divine order means releasing the demand that life explain itself to us. It means allowing events to unfold without labeling them as success or failure. Often, what appears as delay is preparation. What appears as loss is redirection. What appears as ending is merely transition. But these meanings are only visible when we stop interfering. Trust is not blind faith. It is recognition born of experience that whenever we have truly let go, something greater has taken over. Joel often reminded students that God's government is already in operation. We are not waiting for it to begin. We are learning to stop resisting it. And resistance often looks like worry, control, and impatience. When trust is present, even uncertainty becomes gentle. We no longer fear the unknown, because the unknown is God's domain. I will instruct thee and teach thee in the way which thou shalt go. That instruction does not come in advance. It comes in the moment of need. There is a great paradox at the heart of spiritual realization. The world begins to heal when we stop trying to heal it. As long as we see the world as broken, we reinforce the belief in separation. But when we behold the world as the expression of God, even while appearances argue otherwise, we become witnesses to transformation. Jesus never tried to reform society. He did not attack institutions. He did not correct governments. He revealed truth, and truth did the work. Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Not effort, not struggle. Truth. When consciousness shifts, perception shifts, and when perception shifts, experience must follow. This is why healing in the infinite way is not directed toward conditions or people. It is a silent acknowledgement of God's presence where discord appears to be. And in that acknowledgement, discord has no law to sustain it. The world does not need our anxiety. It does not need our judgment. It does not need our mental effort. It needs witnesses, those who can stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. Behold, I make all things new. Not you, not me, I. Eventually, the student discovers that spiritual life is not lived from moment to moment, but from eternity. The past loses its power to define. The future loses its power to threaten. There is only now, and now is sufficient. The eternal now is not a concept. It is an experience. It is the felt sense that life is complete in this instant, that nothing is missing, that nothing is required, that God is present as fullness. In this now, prayer becomes unnecessary, not because communion has ended, but because communion has become continuous. We no longer turn to God, we abide. We no longer seek guidance. we listen. We no longer ask for protection. We rest. I am with you always, even unto the end of the world. Not sometimes, not when conditions improve, always. The end of this teaching is not withdrawal from life, but embodiment. A life lived from God consciousness carries a quiet authority, not dominance, not influence, presence. Others feel it. Circumstances respond to it, but the one living it is often unaware of its effect. This authority does not come from knowledge. It comes from surrender, from having nothing to prove, from needing nothing from anyone, from resting in the certainty that God is the source, the activity, and the fulfillment of life. Such a life is simple, ordinary, unassuming, and yet profoundly transformative. It blesses without intention. It heals without effort. It gives without depletion. And so we come full circle, not to an ending, but to a beginning that has always been present. Consciousness is cause. God is the only power. And man's highest function is not to act, but to be aware, not by might, nor by power, but by my spirit, saith the Lord.